Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Purple Stars podcast. I'm Sarah, your host, and we are so excited about today's guest. She's Italy's HSI director and animal rights advocate, radio host, and author. She is known for her dedication, hard work, and also has a very enchanting personality. Let's dive into her expertise and please welcome Martina Pluda.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for hosting me. It's such a pleasure. Every project you undertake is so nice and so well thought. It's really just such an honor to be part of this.
Thank you so much. I've seen on social media you have been so busy the last few weeks, especially. And that's something I want to dive right in, if that's okay for you, because I've seen they've been incredibly intense on so many levels. How did you manage to cope with the stress, especially on an emotional level?
Well, this is the million-dollar question. I think I am kind of used to it. I work as an animal advocate, and therefore I am faced every day with difficult situations, with challenging, with a lot of animal cruelty. And I am, of course, highly motivated to fight it. And therefore I have, kind of an armor against it, which allows me to do my job. Nonetheless, it doesn't mean that I am not personally affected by what is happening, that I am not, touched and saddened by recent events. So what has happened in Italy just a few weeks ago, police broke into an animal sanctuary, and together with state vets, they have euthanized 9 pigs who had found shelter at this sanctuary. And this is because African swine fever, which is a very infectious and deadly disease for pigs, has been spreading across the region where the sanctuary is located. And basically, this disease hits pigs and also swines in general, and it's a massive threat to the industrial pork industry. So to safeguard this industry and to safeguard its profits, animals are being killed to halt the spread. And it's incredibly sad that also animals who are part of a different system, who have been removed from that terrible profit-oriented system, have also fallen victims of those same laws and same logics that regulate industrial animal agriculture.
Oh, wow. And just for people to know, because you are the director at HSI in Italy, this is just one thing that's on your plate that you're advocating for and that you're trying to make a positive change. Could you share more about HSI for those who are not familiar with it? And also, especially, what is your mission and your focus of your position in that company?
Sure. So HSI, or Humane Society International, is an international animal protection charity which works to advance the welfare of animals in more than 50 countries. So we work around the globe to promote the human-animal bond, rescue and protect dogs and cats, improve farm animal welfare, protect wildlife, promote animal-free testing and research, respond to disasters, and confront cruelty to animals in all its forms. So, as you said, I am HSI's country director in Italy, and I lead and coordinate our efforts and mission in the country. I oversee all our activities and campaigns. And the objective is always to create a more humane world for animals.
This leads me to our next question. As an animal rights advocate, how do you perceive and address the legal distinction of animals that are considered as objects in most countries, while only in a very few countries like UK and Spain, animals are recognized as sentient beings? We are very curious, how does this legal difference impact your effort and strategies in advocating for animal rights and also improved welfare?
I think this is such an interesting question, so thank you for asking it. I think that this says a lot about the way we as a society and our legal system view and value animals. As you said, in many countries around the world, including Italy, animals are still considered as legal things, like a book, a chair, a car, anything which is not animated, as opposed to having something which is called legal personhood. So legal personhood is a status granted to individuals or entities that endows them with certain rights and responsibilities recognized by the law. So humans have legal personhood, corporations have legal personhood, but animals do not. And, this is quite incredible. And this is despite science and in Europe, something called Article 13 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union recognize animals as sentient beings and require policies to pay full regard to their welfare and to their requirements. I must say, though, that also countries who have moved away from classifying animals as things have not necessarily granted them rights. So in most cases, animals are simply classified as something which is called non-things things, with legislation stating basically that animals are not considered as things, but the same provisions will apply when specific legislation doesn't exist. So we are certainly still very far away from granting animals rights such as the right to freedom or bodily integrity. Sure, we grant them different, degrees of protection, but society and therefore also the legal system do make clear and, in my view, cruel distinctions and differences between artificial animal categories. Because let's bear in mind that these categories like farm animals, wild animals, companion animals, these are all artificial categories that we have put in place. So while, for example, neutering a dog without anesthesia is considered animal cruelty and is certainly banned by all European legislations, castrating piglets who are less than 7 days old without it is perfectly legal and standard practice in the pork industry. And this is a perfect example of this kind of dichotomy. So the challenges I face are mostly based on this bias and on the fact that a lot of the animal cruelty I fight is perfectly legal. So the strategies to change these policies, these provisions, the laws start way, way back. So they start with changing the public perception on certain animals and certain exploitative industries. They start with dismantling the idea that animals or certain animals are commodities rather than individuals and that they have needs and are deserving of protection. And why not rights?
So you said it's a long way until a lot of countries are going to change the law. What do you think, or what do you suggest that we as individuals can do along the way until law reflects what animals actually deserve?
So law has oftentimes followed what society has deemed appropriate or modern or current with the times. So I think as soon as enough minds will shift, so will the legislation. So it's important for citizens to speak their minds. And the way citizens speak their minds is by purchasing certain products and not purchasing other products. We have a lot of power as consumers with the way we spend our money and with the way we act at the supermarket, for example, or at the restaurant, or at an apparel store. So the way we buy tells a lot about where our morals and our values are. So I think that people need to, first of all, inform themselves about certain industries, where, for example, their food comes from, where their wool sweater comes from, and then, take decisions accordingly and distance themselves from certain practices, which are, as I mentioned, perhaps legal, and, make a clear statement. I do not want to partake in these industries. I do not want to spend money for these cruel practices. I wish to see them banned. I do not wish to buy these products. So I think this is where we can have a say, and obviously also vote. Vote for the right people, vote for those representatives who care about animals and who care about the environment.
For people who are new to the subject of consumption, like making a right choice, what would you suggest for people who want to be more mindful of it? How can they take the first step of informing themselves, and what are the things that they should look out for? Because I know online there is just so much information, and sometimes we don't really know what is the right information, what is not. Maybe we talk about clothes because everyone needs clothes. What would you suggest looking into and taking more responsibility when purchasing clothes?
So I think the first step is to avoid assuming that a lot of the animal-based materials are kind of leftovers of other industries. So let me explain better. Often we tend to think that leather or down are, for example, the kind of the leftovers of the dairy or beef industry. Or, for example, ducks may be used to produce eggs or meat. or other products. And therefore, why not recycle, their skins or their feathers, since we are exploiting them anyways? But this is not always the case. These industries have reached such an extent that they often need to produce these things themselves. So they are not, it's not necessarily, kind of a circular economy thing. And for example, when we think about down that we can find in almost all our winter jackets, right, and in our duvets, these feathers often come from very, very exploitative industries, such as the industry of foie gras, which is considered a delicacy in countries like France. But we know that this is a very cruel practice where, ducks and geese are force fed. They are, held by their necks. They are fed multiple times a day. Their liver grows to such an extent that they are sick. And then after they are killed, to collect the liver, their feathers are sold to the down industry. In some other instances, for example, the animals are not even dead before they are plucked. So there is this practice called live plucking, and this is also extremely cruel. So I think whenever we approach a purchase, it would be good to have a look at the materials, and are they of animal origin or are they plant-based? And if they're of animal origin, how are they sourced? How were these animals treated? And I must say, unfortunately, that in most of the cases, although brands may bear, their own labels and tell you that everything has been done humanely and that the welfare of animals has been considered, unfortunately, it's not the case. There are standard industry practices that are spread across the board. And unfortunately, most of the clothes will be produced with these practices. So one more quick example is wool. 90% of global wool comes from Australia. Australia breeds these sheep, which have an incredible amount of wrinkles. And this is because more wrinkles means more skin, and more skin means more surface for wool to grow on. And amongst these wrinkles, there is a fly, which makes its nest, and the larvae grow there. This creates horrible infections. And basically, to avoid these infections, pieces of skin are simply cut off the sheep. This without anesthesia or anything. This causes horrible wounds and obviously blood. And so unfortunately, if we buy wool, we are close to 90% buying wool sourced from, cruel practices such as mulesing. So as you said, it is terribly complex. And I think most consumers are simply not aware that this is happening. They're simply not aware that, animals have to be exploited to these extents for, something which is just so normal and daily to us, like wearing a sweater or putting on some shoes. But it's certainly, a good choice to just go beyond the object and look at the, ethics of our choices and how, these objects are sourced.
So, Martina, you are Italian, which means you are a fashionista. You have a great sense of fashion. For everyone out there because I know a lot of people who love to dress nicely, they always think they need to compromise on the style when looking out for more sustainable clothes, for eco-friendly, for recycled clothes. How could you maybe even convince them that that's not the case, so you can feel great in your clothes, love what you're buying, and at the same time being mindful and caring about the environment?
Well, I think I don't have to convince them. I think there's plenty of great designers out there who will be able to convince them. So really just Google, vegan fashion, and you can find, anything from, let's say lower end to upper end. Just think about Stella McCartney. She was one of the first all vegan designers, and I think her clothes look amazing. It's certainly not a compromise on style. And then I think we also do not need to buy new necessarily. I personally believe that it's perfectly fine to buy pre-loved clothes and to buy, pre-loved wool, pre-loved leather, pre-loved jacket. I think everything which has already been produced shouldn't go to waste. And so I think, if you want to have a go at that designer bag and, find it on a secondhand platform, then why not? I think it's just about not buying new pieces of clothing or accessories that are sourced with animal materials. And then again, it's a matter of, kind of consciousness, of ethics. It's about where you draw your personal line. I certainly have, my morals, and I know where I draw that line. But I think it's not a matter of being perfect. It's a matter of being aware and starting to take those steps to be a better consumer, a more informed consumer, a more ethical consumer.
I love how you say it's about knowing where your own morals are and where to draw that line, because there are a lot of advocates in whatever industry it is that consider one moral as a standard. And that's why it's tough for drawing in new people, because everyone feels judged. Everyone feels like putting a label on their forehead. And I love that you are open and that you, without judgment, say, okay, I have my own morals. I have my own standards. I'm educating. And please, whatever you feel comfortable with, introduce this to your life and try it. And I think especially with consuming clothes, it's a great way to go for pre-loved. It saves a lot of money. Clothes that someone else doesn't want anymore can get some life and color back. And at the same time, we are more mindful about the environment. And you're right, there are so many designers now out there that really offer clothes and accessories where we do not have to compromise in our style. So they are already building the bridges that are necessary for us to make a change. And I also would love to talk next about, because I think when we're talking about environment, we have a huge bond with animals. And I would love to discuss the importance of human and animal bond. Like we all know, it's a huge gift of love, but it's much more than that. There's so much research out there that the human-animal bond has, for both the animals and the humans, a huge benefit on the mental level, on the emotional level, spiritual level, and even socially. What are some personal stories and anecdotes that showcase the effects of human-animal bond that you would love to share when it comes to that question?
Sure. So I think, as you said, like any person who has an animal companion knows this, as you said, the love, the relationship, and people who have an animal companion probably knew this before, the science confirmed it. And when addressing the question about the human animal bond, I think it's important to underline that we are not necessarily talking about, the human dog relationship or the human pet relationship in the stricter sense of the term, but about human animal bond. Animals are so much more than just the animals that we have traditionally seen as pets, like cats and dogs, right? So people nowadays are changing their perception, and they are starting to have amazing relationships also with chickens, with cows, with pigs, with rescued wildlife, with insects. Like you see these really sweet videos of people rescuing bees, and just letting them fly off into the garden and so on. So I could tell you about the bond I have with my dog, but this would probably sound very familiar to many podcast listeners. So I have two other stories that I have come across through my work and my personal engagement with animals that I would like to share instead. The first one is connected to the war in Ukraine. I have been, engaged with HSI's response efforts to support refugees and their pets as they fled the countries and their country and came, to other European countries. And in this context, millions of people fled from Ukraine, and never before had we seen so many refugees take their pets with them. This has been really an incredible amount of animals fleeing. And I think this is a testament to the unique and poignant dimension that the human-animal bond can take in the context of conflicts and emergency situations, becoming even more profound and significant than it may have been before. So I have met many refugees with their pets, and literally each one of them told me that leaving their animal behind was not an option, that they had not even considered it, and that they would have done everything in their power to ensure that the whole family could remain united. So in having this continued contact with them over many, many months, we were offering them supplies and veterinary care. So I have met with these people many, many times, and with their animals. I noticed how the human-animal bond became for them the space of comfort and emotional support amidst trauma and uncertainty, especially for kids. It became the space for the continuity of normalcy despite the upheaval and the displacement. It became also the space of companionship to overcome loneliness and isolation in a completely new environment, in a place where, they did not speak the language, they did not have connections, they did not have family. So I think in summary, with this first story, I think the human-animal bond in the context of war and displacement is really complex and emotionally charged, but it's a crucial aspect of the refugee experience, and efforts to provide assistance and resources to both humans and animals in such situations can have a profound impact on the well-being and resilience of those affected. So both on the animals and on their humans. Yeah.
When you started talking, I got goosebumps. I also teared up because it's an answer I did not expect at all, because you're right. Usually people share with their own dogs, their own cats, and animals that they have in their own environment. And it's so touching to hear the story about refugees. I know, especially I was in Austria when everything happened. I think everyone still knows where they were when the news came out. And also the first thing we did, we donated money, we medical care. We also, for people that came with their dogs, we provided our product number one Calm to help the dogs with their stress level. And it's just such a beautiful gift that dogs give us any day, but especially in times of hardship.
Indeed.
And it's really what we need in hardship. It's something that gives us safety, comfort, and especially in an environment where something is constantly changing, where we don't speak the language, where we lost our home, that we know, okay, we can build the home within us with our family. Whether it's, whether we could take the siblings, the parents, the grandparents, the pets, and just knowing, okay, we strip down to everything that really matters in life. And
Indeed.
And that's what we will use as our fuel of strength to keep going forward, wherever it's going to be, and that it's a deep source of hope.
Absolutely. Let me add then one story which I had not programmed to share, but I will, because it just ties in so perfectly with what you just said, and it's still part of this, refugee relief operation that we set up. So one of the refugee families I met had actually arrived to Italy without companion animals. They have 5 daughters, and one of them stopped speaking because of all the trauma and everything that was going on around her. So they decided to do something beautiful. They decided to adopt a dog and a cat. And I just thought this was such a wonderful and powerful story of, displaced humans and displaced non-human animals coming together and helping each other by rescuing these 2 animals. They have changed the life of these 2 individual animals, but these 2 animals have also changed the life of their family, because their daughter started speaking again. She started going out. She started having, a purpose, which was taking care of these animals. So yeah, it's just such an incredible story. I get goosebumps as well when I share this story, because it's one of those stories that has touched me profoundly and which I have witnessed in first person. So it's really beautiful.
And it's a very important point in times of hardship. What you said is having a purpose, and especially for kids, not knowing what is happening, not being able to grasp what is happening. I mean, even us adults, most of the time when something happens, we don't know what is happening. But for kids, it's even more difficult to understand why they suddenly had to leave, why the parents are crying, why they can't see their friends anymore. And I love that the parents reacted in such a caring and giving way, that they really understood well her sign of crying for help with being silent, and that they chose such a beautiful way to help her, and not just her, but also two beautiful animals, and that it was a cycle that, became complete and full, that they could help one another. And it really shows that healing doesn't need words.
Yes, that's true.
And animals in that way are really the best therapists, the best coaches. They're just, it's amazing how much they give and how grateful they are if we also offer them a home, wherever that's going to be. And wow, what two beautiful stories. And you mentioned earlier we wanted to share another story. Could you share
Sure.
that one as well, please?
I'd be happy. Yeah, I think we have the time, so I'll go for it. So the second, which is now the third story, is from a couple I have had the pleasure to meet. They are called Massimo and Lucia. And basically a few years ago, they started a little goat farm in the countryside, about 2 hours away from where I live. And they had this kind of bucolic, romantic idea of owning their farm, leaving the big city, producing goat milk and cheese on a small and like slow scale, nothing intensive, following, the natural cycles, and so on and so on. And as they started to, develop and form their herd of goats, they also started to create bonds with these animals. They all have a name, they all have their personalities, and, they know them. They know who is who. At the same time, though, they started to realize that in order for their business to be profitable, in order to be able to, live with this business, they had to adhere to the same production logic of big scale animal farming.
Ooh.
With all that this entails, such as artificial insemination, separation of mothers and kids, euthanasia of sick animals, and so on. So basically, they thought they could work differently. They could, have a different kind of farming, but this is simply not possible. And it's simply not possible because alternatives do not exist. Vets, for example, are not trained to cure certain animals beyond a certain point. We are just not used to seeing, an old pig, an old cow, an old goat. They don't live that long because we send them to slaughter before that. So Massimo and Lucia rebelled to this system, and they made a promise to their goats that they were never going to be exploited or killed for profit. And I think their story and their change of heart, which I have now, had to shrink in a few minutes because of time, is a testimony to how we can look beyond species boundaries and how we can extend our circle of compassion to include non-human animals and other living beings. So they now have a sanctuary. And in the meantime, they have rescued also other animals. They have now a cow, a pig, some cat colonies, very cute kittens. And I think animal sanctuaries are also a very interesting example of how the human-animal bond can, develop in ways which we maybe didn't even know were possible. So these places not only offer a second chance at life for animals who have, endured neglect, abuse, or exploitation, but they also serve as, powerful reminders of the profound bond that can exist between humans and other animals when, compassion, empathy, and care are at the core of it, when we are able to look beyond these categories that, as I mentioned, are, artificial categories that we have created, to put animals in boxes. So yes, it goes beyond cats and dogs for sure.
I am a huge fan of sanctuaries. I've read up a lot about it in the United States, and some of them offer time and therapy sessions, especially for kids with cancer and their families, so they can they can process what's happening and release some of that pressure and sadness and also uncertainty and fear. And they also have donkeys and goats and cats and dogs, and horses especially. And and that's just also another powerful example how healing time with animals can be. Because especially when something, especially imagining for young kids, where they also, again, do not understand what is happening, to create a safe haven for them is one of the biggest gifts we can offer throughout that time.
Absolutely. And this kind of closes the circle with your first question, with what has been going on in my life and work in the past few weeks, and with what has happened in this sanctuary in Italy. I talked to you about the 9 pigs being, killed brutally and without justification. It's just because the bonds that, people who work at the sanctuary, who own the sanctuary, volunteers, but even visitors, the bonds that they can create with these animals are so profound that it is a very traumatic experience when suddenly this bond is broken so violently by people who simply do not recognize its value. I think we tend to empathize more with the animals we know, so we tend to understand that there is a bond between people and their dogs, but we have a very difficult time in seeing that similar bonds can be created also with donkey, a cow, a pig, a chicken, and therefore, I think more stories like this one need to be told, and more animals, like, let's say, non-traditional companion animals, need to be shown. And this is why I think in the past few weeks in Italy, people have been really vocal about what happened in this sanctuary, because they were not just pigs. They were somebody's family. They were, somebody's companions. And I think the same way that we would want to go to a vet and say goodbye in the most humane possible way, this was the same desire that these sanctuary owners had for their animals, for their companions, for their pigs. And the fact that they were just so brutally killed, with activists being brutally beaten by police, people who wanted to avoid the killing of these animals, I think this really left a scar in the whole animal protection movement in Italy, and in many people who are just compassionate and passionate about animals.
Martina, how can we help kids especially to a bigger bond and feel more affection towards non-traditional animals like cats and dogs, which they already have at home, or their neighbors or their grandparents? Like, how can we help them? Because I can imagine, especially at a young age, a lot of the mindset and a lot of the bond and associations are already built and set in young in the early years. Like, what would you suggest to parents or grandparents? Like, how can they support their kids to have a more open mindset when it comes to animals?
Well, I think it's certainly a challenge, especially for kids and parents who live in cities, because the distance between us and nature and other animals is greater. So it's definitely a challenge, but it can be overcome. And as you said, like, visiting sanctuaries has such an important role. And then I think it's also about the things that we do not do with children that help shape their compassion and empathy towards animals. For example, not taking kids to the zoo, not taking kids to aquariums, to places that simply cage animals, that keep them in an environment which is not their natural environment, which does not meet all of their ethological needs, which does not always put welfare at the forefront. And it's not just about not going to these places, but also explaining why. And kids understand. They really understand. They are so much more compassionate than us adults. And I really do not remember who said this, but it was something along the lines, if you put a rabbit and an apple next to a baby, the baby will try to eat the apple and will want to pet the rabbit, not vice versa. So I think this kind of shows that, at heart and as kids, we love animals. We see them already as our friends and our companions. It's just we are then taught which ones we should love and which ones are okay to be eaten or used or worn. So I think it's about having those conversations with kids without fear that they might not understand. And we don't need to shock them, of course, with gruesome pictures or videos. But it's, just about explaining that, for example, the piece of meat does not exist just like that, that it's not just
Mm.
a product from the supermarket, and that it comes from an animal that, had to die for it to become meat. But this, of course, requires also parents who are willing to have those conversations, who are, willing to, walk that path. And not everybody is. There are certainly a lot of barriers to, shifting one's mindset and one's approach to certain topics, such as, changing the perspective of which animals we love and which animals we instead use, eat, consume, and basically do not even see.
You mentioned the zoo, and I remember when I was around 6 years old, my dad had this conversation with me about the zoo, and he said, because I couldn't really understand why we didn't go to the zoo like everyone else, and he said, well, you got to imagine you would only get a tiny little part of the bathroom, and that's where you need to be forever. He said, and that's how it feels for a lioness to be in the part that she gets. And that really hit me so hard. And I thought, wow, yeah, it's true. And then he said, and now imagine people paying and coming and looking around in the little bathroom. And then I never asked about the zoo again. And I actually told all my friends, I said, can you imagine, for us as kids, it seems so big, all the hectares they get. Or like, wow, it must be great for them. But actually, if you put it in the grand scheme and scale it down to us little kids, it is very small. It is very small. And you're right. It's our responsibility as parents to have those hard conversations and trying to also find a language, maybe speaking in pictures, so kids can better understand about the consequences and also make better choices themselves and build different associations with certain animals. So they know, oh, pigs are as valuable as dogs and cats.
Absolutely. It's about, teaching respect towards all living beings, whether they are, in our living room or out on the street. I often see kids kicking pigeons, and, I know that collectively we don't love pigeons, but this still is not a justification for, for us to teach or let our children run around kicking them. Just let them be, just let them exist. They do not harm you, so why should you?
Also, we teach kids something way more universal when we talk about animals, because it teaches them, same as us humans, we are all valuable, no matter the color, no matter the size, no matter the origin. And it's exactly the same for animals. And yes, some we like more, some we like less, but it's really about having the respect and granting the respect to each being, whether it's on 2 legs, 4 legs, 3 legs. And so it's definitely teaching a powerful life lesson. So we're in 40 minutes, and there's so much more we would love to talk about. Martina and I already expected that. So that's why up front in our preparation time, we decided to split our conversation in 2 parts so you can get the most of it. A little spoiler, part 2 is going to be released next week. And if you love this one, oh my God, part 2, you will love even more, because we're going to dive into very personal areas which you will resonate with. So if you loved this episode, please share it with your family and friends. Don't forget to tag us. And thanks for tuning in. And we're so excited to see you next Wednesday.